Hello everyone, this is Kirk again from Atlanta Carnivorous Gardens. I have been really busy here in the greenhouse doing a lot of repotting and dividing, and today I am out of soil, so I thought it would be a really good time to walk you all through how I mix up a batch of soil. Now, if you watched a couple of my previous videos where I walked you through the features of the greenhouse, one thing that I really harped on was this workbench that I built into this greenhouse. I am really getting a ton of use out of this thing. I really love it. I can't recommend it enough. If you transplant a lot of plants, this makes things so convenient and so easy. So that's what I'm going to be using today. The primary basis for this workbench is a 50-gallon stock tank here that I got from Ace Hardware. You can get it from Tractor Supply, Ace Hardware, anywhere that might sell those kind of stock tank things for farm supply and that kind of thing. These 50-gallon stock tanks are great. I can mix an entire batch of soil within one of these. Now, if you're on a little bit of a tighter budget and you're looking to save some money, another great option would be a mortar mixing tray. You can find those at Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace as well. Those go for, I think, around 20 bucks. And those can be another convenient option. They're not quite as big or as sturdy as the stock tank, but I used those for years previously, and they work just fine. So definitely another option if you're looking to mix up soil. So as you can see, my workbench here, it's great. But it also has this removable bench here, and that's one of the big benefits that I talked about when I talked about the workbench. But as you can see, I'm using that right now for grow space, so I've got a lot of plants growing on there, and growing very happily for January 7th or whatever day it is today. But first thing I need to do is remove these plants, and then I'll take this little removable bench off here, and I'll show you guys in close how I'm going to mix things up. I'll go over kind of the peat and the supplies that I use when I mix a batch and show you how I do it. So let's go ahead, I'll get these plants out of the way and we can get started. Alright, so simple enough. I've got everything cleared out. Now this is what I really love, one of these features here about the workbench. I just pick this up, put it off to the side, and I'm ready to go. Okay, and so now before I really get started, I wanted to talk a little bit of the basics around kind of the ingredients I use. If you grow a lot of carnivorous plants, peat moss is kind of your number one friend. That's the biggest ingredient that you use. I go through a ton of this as I'm replanting things. And because I'm doing so much volume and so many different plants, I always find it best to get these large bales. I find these at home improvement stores. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of hunting. Sometimes nurseries have them in stock. But you really want a large volume of it because you'll go through it pretty quickly, especially with large plants. This is the Fertilome brand that I'm using today. I've had good results with this. I've used a couple other brands and they also work really well. I've never really run into one that was a huge problem for me. A couple things you just want to keep in mind is try to look for a brand that doesn't have a lot of debris mixed in with it. Things like sticks, twigs, leaves. You'll inevitably get some of that, but trying to keep that to a minimum just kind of generally indicates a lower quality product. So if you buy a brand and it has a lot of debris mixed in there, do your best to kind of pick it out. And maybe avoid that brand going forward. But like I said, I've had really good results with this. They will also come in these really compressed bales. And so when they do that, that's for shipping purposes, obviously. But that also dries out the peat entirely. So it's completely dried out and completely compressed. Now, as carnivorous plant growers, we love peat moss for its ability to retain moisture and to stay nice and wet the way our plants like. But given that it's completely dry like this, it almost has the complete opposite effect. So peat moss, when it's totally dried like this, is, I believe the word is hydrophobic. So you'll notice that if you hit it with a hose and it's compressed like this, it won't soak in the water. It'll take a really long time. It will almost repel the water. So you really have to do a good job when you're taking it out of your bale here to break it into small chunks and try and mix in some water early just to get it soaked back in. That way it's nice and moist when you're going in and planting because otherwise it'll be just completely dry and then you'll spend a lot of time watering your plants after you plant them, and it'll take a lot of effort to try and get that peat to soak in the water the way it should. Now, the other thing you generally want when you're mixing carnivorous plant soil is something to aerate the soil. This is critical basically to allow the soil to pull in air as water flows through it. So you want something to kind of break up that peat moss. You can plant in pure peat. I've done it before and it works just great. The thing I always tell my customers is that if you plant in pure peat, you'd be ready to repot a little bit more frequently just because it breaks down a little bit quicker. It gets kind of stagnant and it leads to some not so nice things with your plants a little bit quicker. Whereas if you mix in an additive to kind of aerate the soil and give it some room to breathe, you can generally get your soil to last a little bit longer. Now I opt for Perlite, which a lot of other growers use. You see this mixed in with potting mixes and basically any kind of potted plant that you buy. It's those little white chunks. It's actually some kind of volcanic rock that they use to do this exact purpose, to provide aeration to the soil. I've found that it works great. It's lightweight. It's easy to work with. It is a little bit messy, but I found that it works great, especially here in our southern climate where we get a lot of rain. It doesn't compact as easily as some other things. In the past, I've used clean sand, and that's another great option you can use, but it does, similar to pure peat, tend to compact a little bit quicker and just kind of age out a little bit faster, so you need to repot a little bit more if you're using sand. There are a lot of other options that people use, vermiculite. Just kind of look into other options if you're interested in that. For Perlite, this is the brand I use just because it comes in large bags and it's horticultural grade, so it's really easy to work with and I need a lot of it, so that's why I order it this way. Generally, you can kind of find this at home improvement stores or even online because it is pretty lightweight, so it does ship okay. So if you need a smaller bag, feel free to use any brand. I think there's a Miracle-Gro branded Perlite available out there at home improvement stores, and a lot of people have been worried because they market as like enhanced and added fertilizers and things like that. Generally, you kind of want to stay away from that, but I've heard reports from other growers that used it with no ill effects, so even if that's your only option, I'd say go for it. All right, so finally step one, we are back at the potting bench. I've tried to give you a really good bird's eye view. I'll try and stay out of the way of the camera as much as possible. I apologize if I get in the way or if it's not totally clear. I'm a little bit clumsy around cameras, so please forgive me if that's the case. But I've gone ahead and cut open this kind of top flap to show you. The first step is just going to be getting all of this peat moss into this container and trying to break up the chunks into more manageable chunks. And I'll show you another tool that I'll use to kind of help with that a little bit later on. But for now, step one is just kind of emptying it out of this big, heavy 3 cubic yard container, or 3 cubic foot, sorry. Cubic yards would be much larger. But yeah, just like you would imagine, you're kind of reaching in here and it's these nice chunks at the top. And once you kind of get it started, it gets a lot easier. The beginning's always a little bit difficult with it packed in there so tight. But yeah, you can see this is great quality peat. It's nice and loose. I don't see a ton of debris in here. But yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and empty this out. I won't make you watch this whole thing. It should not take long, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut it off here, but I'll circle back when I'm kind of mixing it up and showing you what I'll be doing next. Okay, so it's all emptied out now. The main thing now is to get this all kind of broken and mixed up and mix in some water. So I am going to show you a couple other tools that I think are handy to have nearby. We talked earlier about mortar mixing trays at Lowe's and Home Depot. If you're over there while you're in that section, go ahead and pick yourself up one of these. This is the cheap option. It's a drill bit that mixes mortar and things like that for when you're doing construction. This is the cheap version. There's much nicer versions that are a little bit more expensive and work a little bit better, but this works just fine for me. Unfortunately, I was using my drill last night and forgot to charge the battery, so I'm just going to be doing this by hand, but I did want to show you that. Then the other thing is to always have your water wand handy, just because it's helpful to kind of mix in water at different stages as I'm doing this. So I'm just going to start by kind of pushing all the loose powdery stuff over to the edge and just looking for any chunks. And I got really lucky with this one. There's really not a lot of large chunks. Usually there's quite a bit more, but I'm actually having to kind of dig and look for these. The other thing is, obviously, mixing soil is very, very messy. This is a lot of peat dust up in here. It's going to get up into your nose and on your clothes. So make sure you're not wearing your nicest clothes that you really care about. And maybe consider wearing a mask if your lungs get irritated easily. But given that I'm not seeing a lot of chunks right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just giving it a really generous helping of water. Kind of soak things down. That'll help cut down on some of that dust. And unfortunately, we have had freezing temperatures, so it looks like my hose is on the fritz for the evening. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do this anyway because I want to show you guys kind of how it works, and I can't wait to finish mixing this batch up. But just imagine that if you had the hose, you would be making sure everything is nice and wet. Be really generous and give lots of water. It takes quite a bit when you have a fresh batch like this to get it all soaked in. But yeah, that's kind of the general process. I'm going to go through here and look for any chunks. If I see any, I'll break them up. And then I'll kind of come back online when it's time to mix in the perlite. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and start mixing in some perlite. And so it's going to look like a lot at the beginning, but the perlite mixes in fairly quickly, so if you start with a small amount, you'll quickly find that you end up with pockets at the bottom that don't have any perlite and things like that. So you want to go ahead and mix in a healthy amount. I shoot, people say around 50-50 mix. That's a little aggressive for me. Perlite's a little too expensive to go 50-50. So I probably would say I shoot for about 70% peat, 30% perlite if I can. I'll probably have to go back and add a little bit more here, but let me mix some of this up and I'll show you kind of the consistency that I'm looking for with the finished product. So again, if I had my mortar mixing bit, I could show you you just kind of stick the drill bit in there, turn it on, and it all kind of mixes up on its own. But doing this by hand is not bad. That's the way I've used to do it for years, so let me go ahead and show you. So it's getting there. It's important to kind of reach to the bottom because you can see it looks really good and mixed now. But if you reach down to the bottom here, you can see all this pure peat that doesn't have any perlite mixed in. Make sure, the perlite's going to kind of fall off the edges too, so make sure you're kind of bringing it back into the fold. It's a lot like baking and mixing dough, kind of. You just want everything good and mixed throughout. But your end product, when you're done mixing, should look at consistency something like this. Again, you see mostly peat moss, but there's plenty of perlite mixed in there. This soil is going to breathe really well while holding on to a lot of water. That's the number one thing you really want to consider when you're looking at your carnivorous plants. You want it to hold water. They are bog plants. They need to stay wet. At the same time, you need to make sure that as it rains, that rain is able to percolate through the soil, pull air and gases down with it, and allow for that gas exchange in the roots. So this is really what you're looking for. It's nice and loose and fluffy, feels really good. If I were to spray this with the hose, it would immediately start soaking up water, and my roots can still breathe. So hopefully this was helpful for you. This is a nice big batch. This will get me through probably a week when I'm in my heavy repotting phase in the winter here, but would last much longer during the regular growing season. But as always, let me know if you have any questions. I know this stuff can be a little bit intimidating and confusing, but always just advise, try to keep it simple. Peat moss, perlite, mix it together really good, give it a drink of water, and you're good to go. Thanks for watching, everybody.